What is going on, investors? Back again. Time to take a look at another stock. Today, we're going to take a look at Pinterest, ticker symbol PINS. This company has a $20 billion valuation. They just reported earnings. Let's jump right into some of the slides, and then we'll jump into the earnings, and then we'll jump into the stock chart. Something really interesting happened to this stock. I think you're going to want to hang around and see what we have to say about that. So monthly active users for Pinterest actually ticked up really nicely in the quarter. I think that makes a lot of sense. There's still a lot of people at home, or a lot of people more comfortable doing things at home. International growth was absolutely phenomenal. And same with the United States. I think the United States, a more mature market for them. International, obviously, from a monthly active user space, is growing much more quickly. Now, from a revenue perspective, we actually see that revenue tick down because this is Q2 2019. This is Q2, the most current quarter. We went from 238 down to 232 in the United States. I think some of that, obviously, the growth was nice in the user base, but you obviously have a lot of advertisers that are pulling out from the travel industry, from the leisure industry, from the restaurant. All those are probably pulling back on advertising. Now, what was interesting, though, is that the international revenue ticked up and almost doubled. And so not all of the pullbacks in the revenue is probably based on the health situation we're going on. It's probably more of a mature market here in the United States. And so that's something that you want to keep in mind. But this international growth is phenomenal. We're seeing huge user growth and obviously on the revenue side as well. Now, from an average revenue per user, we went from 11 cents up to 14 cents internationally. That's nice. But again, we went from $2.80 down to $2.50 for the United States user. I think you can look at this two ways. The United States business is mature, but the international is not as mature, and it's not even nearly as profitable from a per user basis. If this can, I don't think this international is ever going to get into this $2 range. I mean, never say never, but I don't think it's ever going to get that high. But if it can get to 30, 40, 50 cents a user, this stock is probably tremendously undervalued where it's at today. Now, from a global perspective, we went from 88 cents down to 70 cents. So it shows you the reliance here on this United States revenue. Let's jump into the revenue. We'll take a look. We've got 3 months ended here, 2019 and 2020 here. And then we've got the 6-month view here as well. Revenue ticked up big time. Take a look. 261 up to 272. They probably had faster growing, but considering everything's going on, this is actually pretty nice growth. Now, I think even more important than that is our margin. So the cost of revenue, this is a pretty high margin business. We spent 108 to make 172. Notice that we spent just a little bit less in the previous period to make 261. So this is a really nice high margin business. It's scaling up very nice. The same holds true for the 6-month period as well. Now, research and development, this is really interesting. So we spent $800 million in the previous period. I would guess a lot of this is stock-based compensation, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Now that went all the way down to 136. So we went from 800 down to 136. It's showing me that Pinterest either had a compensation package baked into their R&D department that kicked in 2019, or they were working on a product or some kind of feature on the website, maybe a number of those different things, but that went way down. Same with sales and marketing. We see that went from 296 all the way down to 86. And we see the same thing on general administrative. We went from 224 to 45. Again, this is a company I think that IPO'd last year. And so maybe a lot of the compensation was kind of up front in terms of its employees, and we see a more normalized. Now, what has that done? It's done wonders for the loss from operations. We lost $1.1 billion in the 3-month. Now we lost $104 million. So again, I'm not saying $104 million is not a lot of money, but compared to $1.1 billion, it's an absolute turnaround in just a year. If they can keep moving in this direction, I don't expect it to get this wide, but if they can keep growing their revenues, keep margins where they're at, this is a company that probably is turning the corner here close to profitability. I think maybe this is why the stock really had a great reaction to these earnings numbers. We see on a 6-month basis, same thing holds true. We went from $1.2 billion loss from operations down to $250 million. That's quite an improvement. And if that type of trend continues, this stock's moving in the right direction. Now, what's moving maybe in the wrong direction is we see 6-month ended here. We had 285,000 shares outstanding, now all the way up to 581. I mean, we basically doubled that. In fact, maybe a little bit more than a double in terms of shares outstanding. We see that trend holds through for the 3 months, where we went 443 up to 586. Man, that's some quick dilution. So that's just something that you want to keep in mind if you're a shareholder. Let's zoom up to the balance sheet. So we've got Pinterest's balance sheet here. We've got December, so the beginning of the year, 6 months into it, into June. Cash and cash equivalents at the beginning of the year was like 1.7-ish, and we're the same here, about 1.7. Now, on this accounts receivable, what I wanted to point out was, look at the net allowances. So these are kind of like, I guess you can consider these almost like charge-offs, where we went from 2.8 and we doubled it to 5.6. Again, this is not a big deal to Pinterest in particular, but I want to point this out. As a good investor, you're kind of taking clues from all sorts of things, especially like a macro investor. We're seeing charge-offs at Pinterest double. That's showing me businesses are under stress. I think the thesis that things are going to get worse before they get better, even as we see health improvements and things like that, I think is one that reigns true, because we're seeing a lot of pain out here. And the fact that Pinterest doubled their net allowances in the quarter or in the last 6 months, showing you how many businesses have come under pressure. Now, back to Pinterest, we made $2.2 billion in assets. We didn't make that. That's what we have on the balance sheet. Compares reasonably favorably to the beginning of the year, but that's not the full story. Let's come down here to the liability side. Here's total liabilities right here. Total liabilities, $342 million. This is as clean a balance sheet I have looked at in a long time. I mean, we can cover the liabilities right here, right off the top with cash, and have tons of money left over, tons of assets left over. If you're just beginning in your investment journey and you want to learn how to read balance sheets, I encourage you to read this one from Pinterest. Dig into it, okay? There's barely any goodwill. There's not any inventory. This is as clean as it gets. When you understand what's going on here with Pinterest, then you can go to the more complex companies out there. But this is as clean as it gets. Again, this company just IPO'd. I kind of expect this, and whether or not it remains like this remains to be seen. But the company is moving in the right direction. They have tons of cash, and things are looking pretty good. I'm going to zoom down here really quickly to the cash flow statements. So cash flow statement for Pinterest right here. So usually these are 6 month ended, 19 and 20. What happens is we pull down this net income number, but what I want to show you is we add back in some things that are basically not cash. Share-based compensation. Look at this. We went from 1.1 billion down to 143 million. So that's the trend we saw earlier on the statement of operations, where R&D and sales and marketing, general administrative, all that went down primarily because we're compensating them far less with the shares. Whether or not that reoccurs, I can imagine it probably will. I think this may be a more normalized rate, at least I think shareholders should hope for. Now, so that took us from a negative 16 million in cash flows to a positive 20 million in cash flows. Again, I think that's also why this stock has ticked up, because investors kind of see them turning a corner, at least from a share-based compensation perspective. Now, coming down here, we see the IPO was here. We had 1.5 billion. Looks like they rewarded pretty hefty their employees, as they should. And that's where we're at with this cash flow statement. Everything else looks pretty much in line. Now, I wanted to jump over to the chart here, because something interesting has happened with this stock. Like a lot of stocks, we sold off here, made a low back in March, close to $10, had a nice little rally. You know, we've broken trend a few times, but the stock keeps going up. But now, boom, we had this big gap up. Right here is where we reported earnings, and this stock's gapped up, and it's put us out on an island. Some people call this an island top. Some people call it an island top reversal. I'll let you decide what it is. Typically, I do not like to buy stocks when they have this massive gap up. Now, I know the trend is in the right direction. Sometimes they like to channel up here and then continue on trend. That is possible, but I want to show you back here, back in November, the opposite happened. We actually gapped down here, and then boom, what happened? This stock came full circle, and then boom, it filled this gap almost perfectly right here, right to the bottom of this candle. And then there may be some technical, maybe some novice investors broke in here thinking it was going to make new highs and kind of push forward. But what happened is the stock got rejected down here, really made a massive move down, made a massive move up, and then boom, we've gapped up again. Now, we see the MACD is rolling over. Anytime this MACD rolls over, what happens to shares? The shares go down. Rolls over here, shares go down. We can't see it. It's slightly off screen here, but the shares rolled over as MACD rolls down. So what I would wait to do with Pinterest if you want to get into it. Now, I put a trend line in here at $26. I think that's the bottom of the range. If this stock reverse course heads back down to 26, I think there'll be some support there. A little bit higher up, if you want to be a little more aggressive, I think in the $28 range would be an interesting spot to start a position in Pinterest. Now, it's difficult. Okay, it's easy to buy shares up here. Most novice investors, rookie investors, they buy high and they end up getting stuck holding the bag when the shares go lower. It's hard. When this stock breaks trend, it's going to break down. It's going to come down. There might be some bad news. There might be bad macro news. It's actually much harder to develop that kind of discipline to come in here and buy the shares when they trend down. So that's why I like to pick these levels on these videos. So I would be targeting right around a $28 level here. That might be a little early. If you really want to push it, you can come down here to 26. You might end up missing it. But I think this gap is going to be proved to be a magnet at some point. We already see the candle starting to trail off here. Volume's still not terrible, but it hasn't been increasing. I would expect this stock to come back down, at least in the near term, down to the bottom of this candle, somewhere in the 31.25 range. If it eventually breaks that, I think you're coming back down to 28. That to me would be an interesting spot because this stock appears to be coming in the right direction from all perspective, getting their cost in line and all that. The only thing that's a slight negative is they're still diluting you fairly heavily as an investor. But from a valuation perspective, it's fairly much in line with what you see at Google and Facebook. Those stocks a little bit more mature. Pinterest has got some momentum behind it. I think it's an interesting stock. It's one I'm definitely going to be taking a look at here closer as this reversal likely happens sometime soon with these shares. So there you go. There's Pinterest for you. Leave me a comment down below. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. Maybe consider hitting that subscribe and like button as well. Really appreciate it. We'll be back again soon with more videos. Good luck with your investments.